The journey was a silent, crystalline dream. Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, was navigating the strange, non-physical dimensions of the Phantom Zone, his bioship a vessel of living crystal humming through the ghostly ether. It was a routine exploration, a mapping of the boundaries of the prison dimension that had held so many of his people's greatest criminals. He was a cartographer of oblivion, seeking to understand the limits of his universe. The anomaly was not a creature or a ship, it was a flaw, a place where the smooth gray skin of the Phantom Zone was scarred, puckered, and thin. His ship's sensors flared with warnings of a dimensional cascade, a bleed-through from an entirely different reality. Before he could react, his vessel was caught in the current, a leaf in a cosmic river. The gray nothingness of the zone shattered, and he was pulled through the tier. He did not experience a violent crash or a fiery re-entry. His passage into the new world was as gentle as his own nature. To the inhabitants of the lands below, it was a miracle. In the middle of a gray, overcast day, a new star appeared in the sky. It did not streak across the heavens like a meteor. It descended with a slow, graceful, and utterly silent purpose. It was a point of light so pure and so hopeful that it seemed to burn away the gloom, casting a warm golden glow across the desolate, rolling hills of the lone lands. Shepherds in the fields fell to their knees in awe, shielding their eyes from the gentle divine radiance. The star descended and landed in a fallow, empty field. There was no explosion, no tremor in the earth. There was only a soft, musical chime, a sound like 1,000 tiny crystal bells ringing at once that echoed across the plains. Where it came to rest, the grass was not scorched or broken, but seemed healthier, greener, infused with a strange new life. At the center of the field now rested a crystalline structure, a pod of multifaceted, gently glowing crystal, half buried in the rich soil of Middle-earth. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the sighing of the wind and the distant bleating of sheep. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Then the crystal structure became translucent. The light within pulsed softly, and with another, quieter chime, a section of the pod dissolved, retracting into the main body to form an opening. A figure stepped out. He was tall and powerfully built, but moved with a quiet, unassuming grace. He was clad in strange, seamless garments of blue and red, with a flowing red cape that settled around his shoulders in the gentle breeze. His face was one of honest, simple strength, his eyes a clear, piercing blue that seemed to hold the light of a kinder, younger world. He looked upon the gray sky, the green hills, and the distant weather-beaten ruins with an expression of profound, gentle confusion. Kal-El of Krypton stood on the soil of Arda. His super senses, accustomed to the familiar frequencies of Earth, were overwhelmed by a new alien symphony. He could hear the frantic, frightened heartbeats of the shepherds a league away. He could hear the whisper of the wind as it told tales of ancient mountains and deep, dark forests. He could see, with his microscopic vision, the individual blades of grass, each one a perfect living thing. He could feel the sun. It was a yellow sun, just like the one he had grown up under. But it felt different. Older, weaker, perhaps, but its light still filled him with a familiar, comforting strength. He did not know where he was. He did not recognize the constellations, the planetary magnetic field, the very composition of the soil. He was lost, adrift in a universe that was not his own. But his core programming, the deepest lessons taught to him by his Kryptonian father and his human one, remained unchanged. He was not a conqueror. He was not a king. He was a helper. He was a friend. He looked out at this new, ancient, and seemingly troubled world, and his first and only thought was simple. How can I help? Aragorn, son of Arathorn, known in the wilds as Strider, had his own concerns. He was guiding 4 small, frightened hobbits through the desolate lone lands, a journey fraught with peril. The Black Riders, the servants of the enemy, were hunting them, and every shadow seemed to hold a new threat. He had seen the falling star. To his ranger's eyes, trained to read the sky, it was an event of profound unnaturalness. It did not move like a star. It moved with intent. His first thought was of Saruman, of some new sorcery from the fallen wizard. He led the hobbits on a wide, looping path to avoid its landing site, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. But as they drew nearer, he felt no sense of malice, no creeping dread that always preceded the servants of Mordor. There was only a strange, peaceful silence, and a faint musical hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Curiosity, the trait of a true scout, overcame his caution. He left the hobbits hidden in a rocky defile and crept forward alone, his movements as silent as a hunting cat. He peered over a ridge and saw the crystalline ship. It was like nothing he had ever seen, a jewel from a giant's hoard embedded in the earth, and beside it stood the man. Aragorn's breath caught in his throat. The man was garbed in colors too bright for this faded world, his posture one of calm, watchful stillness. He did not look like a warrior, yet Aragorn, who had looked into the eyes of kings and monsters, could sense an aura of power around him that was staggering. It was not the menacing, oppressive power of a sorcerer, but a vast, calm power, like the deep, silent strength of the ocean. He decided to reveal himself. He stood up slowly, his hands held open and away from his sword, a clear sign of peace. Kal-El saw the man rise from the rocks. His supervision had been tracking him for the last mile. He saw the worn, travel-stained clothes, the sword at his hip, the grim, noble look on his face. He saw a protector, a guardian. He focused his super-hearing not on the man's heartbeat, but on the flow of his thoughts, the bioelectric currents of his brain. It was a Kryptonian trick, a way to understand the intent and language of a new species without intrusion. He listened to the patterns, the syntax, the flow of the man's internal monologue. He heard the words for stranger, danger, hobbit, Rivendell. In moments, the complex, archaic language of the Western tongue, the common speech, was downloaded and processed into his mind. "I mean you no harm," Kal-El said, his voice calm and resonant. It was the first time he had spoken the language, but it came out perfectly, without accent. Aragorn was taken aback. He had expected a strange tongue, a challenge, or silence. He had not expected a perfect, unaccented reply in the common speech. "You speak our language?" "I am a quick study," Kal-El replied with a gentle, disarming smile. "My name is Clark. I am a traveler. My vessel was damaged, and I find myself lost. Can you tell me what world this is?" Aragorn's mind raced. Clark, a simple, unassuming name for a being who had fallen from the sky in a crystal starship. What world this is? The question was so profound, so utterly bizarre, that he did not know how to answer. "You are in Eriador," he said finally, using the ancient name for the lands, "in the realm of Arnor. Though it has long been fallen, the men of the West call this land Middle-earth." "Middle-earth," Clark repeated, the name feeling strange on his tongue. He looked around, his gaze seeming to take in everything at once. "You are in some kind of trouble. I can hear the fear in your heart. You are being hunted." Aragorn's hand instinctively went to his sword. This being could hear his heart. "We are," he admitted, his voice grim. "Servants of the Dark Lord are upon our trail. We must make for the sanctuary of Rivendell." "Dark Lord," Clark murmured. He had heard that phrase before, in 1,000 different myths on 1,000 different worlds. It always meant the same thing, a tyrant, a bully on a cosmic scale. He looked at Aragorn, and in the ranger's tired, determined eyes, he saw a good man fighting a desperate battle. "You are protecting others," Clark stated, his gaze flickering for a moment towards the defile where the hobbits were hiding. "Let me help you. Your enemies will be my enemies." Aragorn was a man of logic and experience. His every instinct, honed by decades in the wild, should have screamed at him to run from this impossible star-fallen man. But he looked into Clark's clear, honest eyes, and he saw no deception, no ambition, no darkness. He saw only a simple, profound, and overwhelmingly powerful desire to do the right thing. It was a quality he had rarely seen in the world of men. "The road is dangerous," Aragorn warned. "I am not easily broken," Clark replied with a quiet, confident smile. Aragorn nodded slowly, a decision made that would alter the course of the history of the world. "Very well, Clark, the traveler. Come, there are some people you should meet, and a darkness that is gathering faster than any of us can ride." The journey to Weathertop was marked by a new, strange sense of security for the hobbits. The tall, quiet man in blue and red who called himself Clark walked beside Strider, his presence a calming, reassuring constant. He moved with a silent, effortless grace, and though he carried no weapon, the hobbits felt safer with him than they would have with an entire army of Gondor. They reached the ancient, ruined watchtower of Amon-Sul as twilight began to bleed across the sky. While Aragorn scouted the surrounding lands for any sign of their pursuers, Clark stood on the summit, his gaze sweeping across the vast, empty landscape. "I can see them," he said quietly, as Aragorn returned. Aragorn's head snapped up. "Where?" "5 of them," Clark replied, his eyes focused on a distant, dark line of trees miles to the east. "Dressed in black, they move with an unnatural speed, They will be here in less than an hour. Aragorn's heart went cold. The 9. He had hoped to reach Rivendell before a direct confrontation. 5, he murmured. They are splitting their forces to hunt us. We must make a stand here. The ruins offer some advantage. The hobbits, terrified, huddled in a hollow on the summit, their small swords in their hands. Aragorn built a fire, its light a small defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. He knew it would draw them, but it was also a weapon against them. As the last of the light faded from the world, they came. 5 black, hooded figures, their forms seeming to glide over the rocky ground. A wave of palpable, soul-crushing terror washed over the hilltop, a psychic assault that promised death and despair. The hobbits cried out, their courage failing. Even Aragorn felt a chill of ancient fear grip his heart. But Kal-El felt nothing. He stood before the terrified hobbits, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression one of calm, curious analysis. The Nazgul's aura of fear was a psychic weapon designed to prey on the mortality and despair of living creatures. It broke against Superman's mind like a wave against a mountain of pure, unshakable hope. His Kryptonian consciousness, fortified by a lifetime of love and a simple, absolute belief in the good of others, was simply immune to their primary weapon. "What is this feeling?" he asked Aragorn, his voice a low, curious rumble. "It feels cold." "It is their power," Aragorn gasped, fighting against the despair, the black breath. "It drains the will." The 5 ring wraiths glided into the firelight, their forms indistinct and terrible within their black robes. They drew their long, pale swords, and their leader, the tallest and most menacing of them all, fixed its unseen gaze on Frodo. The hobbit, his will broken by the weight of the ring and the wraith's terror, stumbled forward. The Witch King of Angmar lunged, his Morgul blade held high, its tip glowing with a sickly, evil light. The blade was not meant to kill, but to poison, to turn its victim into a lesser wraith, a slave to the will of Sauron. Aragorn roared and leaped forward, his own sword raised, but he was too far away. He was not, however, faster than a speeding bullet. Kal-El moved, to the hobbits and Aragorn. He did not seem to run. He simply was. One moment he stood by the fire, the next he was between Frodo and the Witch King. The Morgul blade, a weapon of ancient sorcery forged in the blackest pits of Angmar, a blade that had brought kingdoms to ruin, stabbed forward. It was aimed at Frodo's heart, but it found Clark's chest. There was not a clang of metal or a thud of flesh. There was a sound like a single, high-pitched, discordant note. The magical blade, a thing that operated on the principles of soul corruption and spiritual decay, met a physical object of such absolute quantum-level density that its own magical structure could not hold together. The Morgul blade shattered. It did not break. It exploded into 1,000 glittering, useless shards of ice-cold metal, its ancient evil unmade by contact with an object that was simply too real for its magic to affect. A collective hissing gasp went up from the 5 Nazgul. The Witch King stumbled back, the hilt of his broken sword still in his hand, his unseen face a mask of utter disbelief. His greatest weapon, his tool of damnation, had been broken like a child's toy. For a long, silent moment, the wraith simply stared at the man in blue who stood unharmed, a few glittering fragments of their blade lying on the ground at his feet. They had existed for thousands of years. They had never encountered anything that they could not cut, could not poison, could not corrupt. Their confusion quickly turned to rage. The shriek that erupted from the 5 Nazgul was not a sound of terror. It was a symphony of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the collective rage of 5 immortal spirits, kings and sorcerers of old, whose power had just been proven meaningless. The sound tore at the very air, a promise of a doom far worse than a simple, clean death. They attacked as one, a whirlwind of black robes and pale, ghostly swords. They were no longer focused on the hobbit. Their entire malevolent attention was now fixed on the impossible being who had defied them. They swarmed him. Their blades, though lesser than the Witch King's, still held a chill of the grave, each one capable of inflicting wounds that would never heal. To Aragorn, watching with a mixture of terror and awe, it looked as though the man in blue was about to be overwhelmed by a tide of living shadows. But it was like watching wolves trying to savage a mountain. Kal-El stood his ground, a calm, immovable object in the center of their storm. Their swords scraped and skittered across his chest and arms, the sound of dull metal on a substance of impossible hardness. The blades, which could cut through steel as if it were cheese, could not leave so much as a scratch on his Kryptonian skin. He caught one of the wraith's wrists in his hand. The Nazgul struggled, but it was held fast. It was like being caught in a clamp forged from the bedrock of the world. Kal-El's grip was gentle but absolute. Through the black glove, the Nazgul felt not heat or cold, but a profound, overwhelming sense of life, a vitality so pure and so powerful it was like being touched by the sun itself. It hissed and tried to pull away, its very essence recoiling from the contact. The other four continued their futile assault. Their blades were useless. Their presence of fear was useless. They were kings of a world of shadow, and they had just encountered a being who was a living star. Enough of this, Clark said, his voice quiet but firm. He had analyzed them, understood them. They were not truly alive. They were shades, creatures of darkness and sorcery, held in the physical world by the power of their master. Physical force, he realized, was not the answer. They could not be punched into submission. They had to be driven out. He looked at the shrieking, swirling shadows before him, and his eyes began to glow. At first it was a faint, red glint, like the embers of a dying fire. Then the glow intensified, becoming a brilliant, burning crimson. The air around his face began to shimmer with heat. The Nazgul, ancient beings with a deep instinctual understanding of power, sensed the change. They faltered in their attack, a new unfamiliar sensation touching them for the first time in millennia, a prickle of genuine fear. This was not the fire of a torch or a hearth. This was a heat that felt primal, pure, and utterly hostile to their nature. Kal-El unleashed his heat vision. He did not release it as a cutting beam, a weapon designed to slice through steel. He released it as a controlled, brilliant, radiant wave of pure light and heat. It was not an attack, it was a sunrise. A torrent of golden-white energy erupted from his eyes, not as a beam but as a floodlight that banished every shadow from the summit of Weathertop. The ruins of the ancient watchtower were illuminated with a light brighter than any noonday sun. The light was not merely hot, it was pure. It was the light of a star, a fundamental force of the universe, and it was anathema to the creatures of shadow. The 5 Nazgul screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Their forms, which were held together by shadow and will, could not endure in the face of such absolute, purifying light. Their black robes caught fire, not with a normal flame, but with a cold white fire that consumed them in an instant. The ancient armor beneath them glowed white-hot and then dissolved into dust. Their physical forms were being utterly, completely incinerated. One by one, their spirits were forcibly banished, torn from the physical world by a power they could not fight, could not comprehend, and could not endure. Their dying shrieks echoed across the lone lands, a sound of immortal spirits being unmade before they fled back to the darkness of Mordor, terrified and broken. The light from Kal-El's eyes faded, plunging the summit back into the gentle glow of Aragorn's campfire. Silence. The 5 black riders were gone. All that remained were 5 small piles of fine gray ash and the lingering scent of ozone. The hobbits stared, their mouths agape, their fear forgotten and replaced by a sense of awe so profound it was almost religious. Aragorn stood leaning on his sword, his mind reeling. He had spent his life fighting the shadows. He had never dreamed it was possible to simply burn them away. He looked at Clark, who stood with a calm, almost sad expression on his face. The man in blue looked down at the small piles of ash. They were trapped, Clark said softly, his voice filled with a gentle pity. Slaves to a master they could not escape. I hope they find peace. Aragorn could only stare. This being, who had just wielded the power of a vengeful god, was now mourning the fate of his defeated enemies. He was not a warrior. He was not a sorcerer. He was something else entirely. He was a protector. And the world of men had just found its greatest and most unlikely champion. The arrival of Aragorn's party in Rivendell was an event of great moment. The news of the ring-bearer's safe arrival spread quickly through the hidden valley, but the whispers that followed were not of the ring, but of the stranger who had come with them. A man in clothes of impossible color and cut, who had walked beside the Dunedain as an equal, and who radiated an aura of quiet, calm power that made even the elven lords pause and take notice. The Council of Elrond was convened, a secret gathering of the wise and powerful to decide the fate of the world, and in their midst an utterly unforeseen variable was introduced. Kal-El, introduced by Aragorn simply as Clark, a traveler and a friend, sat and listened with a patient, attentive silence. He listened to the story of the ring, of Sauron, of the last alliance of elves and men. He listened to Boromir's tale of Gondor's failing strength, to Legolas's news of Gollum's escape, to Gimli's report of the darkness stirring in Moria. He listened, and in his heart he felt a deep, familiar sorrow. It was the story of every world he had ever tried to help, a world plagued by war, fear, and a lust for power that threatened to consume everything. When Frodo, with a heavy heart, placed the One Ring upon the stone plinth, Kal-El felt it for the first time. He felt no temptation. His pure, incorruptible heart was a fortress against the ring's whispers of ambition and domination. Instead, he felt its pain. He felt the condensed malice, the millennia of suffering and hate that had been poured into the simple gold band. It was a psychic scream of pure evil, and his every protective instinct flared in response to it. The council fell into despair. The ring could not be destroyed by any conventional means. It could not be sent over the sea. It could not remain in Rivendell. The only path, desperate and near impossible, was to take it into the heart of Mordor and cast it into the fires of Mount Doom. The mood was grim. The quest was deemed a fool's hope. It was then that Kal-El, who had remained silent throughout the long debate, finally spoke. His voice, calm and full of a simple, honest reason, cut through the gloom. "Forgive me," he said, standing to his full, impressive height. "I am new to your world, and perhaps I do not understand all the complexities of this magic. But it seems to me the problem is one of transportation." Every eye in the council turned to him. "You say this ring must be taken to a mountain in the land of Mordor," he continued, his logic simple and direct. "And you say this journey is long and perilous, that Sauron's armies and spies will stand in your way. But what if the journey was not long? What if it was not perilous?" He looked at Frodo, then at the ring. "Let me take it," he said, his voice ringing with a pure, honest desire to help. "Let me take the ring. I can fly. I am faster than any bird, stronger than any mountain. I can carry it to this Mount Doom before Sauron even knows I have left. The journey for me will take but a moment. The burden will be lifted from this small one, and the world will be saved before another life is lost." His offer was so simple, so logical, so overwhelmingly powerful, that for a moment no one knew how to respond. The entire, epic, world-defining quest that had been the subject of their despair was, to him, a simple delivery. Gimli was the first to find his voice. "Fly," the dwarf scoffed, though his tone lacked its usual conviction. "Men cannot fly." "I am not like the men you know," Clark replied gently. It was Gandalf who finally broke the stunned silence, his face a mixture of wonder and deep, profound concern. He had felt the power of this being. He did not doubt his claims. "No," the wizard said, his voice heavy with the weight of a wisdom Kal-El could not yet understand. "No, you cannot take the ring." A murmur of confusion and protest went through the council. Boromir of Gondor looked from the simple, powerful man to the wizard, his face a mask of disbelief. "Gandalf, what are you saying? He offers a swift end to this, a victory beyond our wildest hopes." "You see his strength, Boromir," Gandalf replied, his wise old eyes fixed on Kal-El. "And it is a strength like none this world has ever seen. You see a fist that can shatter mountains, but you do not see the enemy we truly face." He turned his gaze to Clark. "You are good," Gandalf said, the words a simple statement of absolute fact. "I have looked into your heart, and I have seen no shadow, no greed, no lust for power. It is a light that is as bright and as pure as the stars from which you fell, and that is why you cannot take the ring." "I don't understand," Clark said, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "I am strong enough to resist any who would try to take it from me." "My friend," Elrond now spoke, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "The power of the ring is not in the armies that seek it. Its power is in the desire for it. It is a thing of pure malice, and its chief weapon is corruption. It does not need to be taken from you by force. It will whisper to your heart. It will find the smallest seed of your own goodness and twist it into a great and terrible evil." Kal-El was still uncomprehending. "But I would never use it for evil. My only desire is to help people." "And that," Gandalf said, his voice a sad, knowing whisper, "is the very door through which it would enter. It would not tempt you with kingdoms or with power over others. It would tempt you with the power to save everyone." The wizard's words hung in the air, and for the first time, a flicker of understanding, and with it, a deep unease, touched Kal-El's heart. "It would show you the suffering of this world," Gandalf continued, his voice painting a grim picture. "It would show you the wars in the south, the famines in the east. It would show you every injustice, every sorrow, every tear, and it would say to you, "Take me. With my power you can end all of this. You can create a world with no more pain, no more suffering, a perfect world, an order of perfect, benevolent peace." Elrond nodded in grim agreement. It would prey on your compassion. You would take it, believing you were doing good. You would become a king, a savior, a god of this world, and your rule would be absolute. Your peace would be the peace of a cage, no matter how beautifully gilded. You would take away the freedom of men to choose their own path, to make their own mistakes, all in the name of protecting them. And in the end, you would become a tyrant far greater and more terrible than Sauron himself, for your tyranny would be born of love. The silence in the council was absolute. Kal-El looked at the small golden ring, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something akin to fear. He had faced monsters, aliens, beings of immense physical power. He had always won, but he had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that was an idea, an enemy that would use his own best intentions as a weapon against him. He was a being of near absolute physical power. He could move planets and outfly the light, but he was, at his core, a simple man from Kansas, with a simple, unshakable belief in doing the right thing. He was now being told that in this world, his very goodness was a liability. His greatest strength was his greatest vulnerability. He looked at Frodo, at the small, terrified hobbit who had been tasked with this impossible burden. He saw the trust and the hope in the hobbit's eyes, and he finally understood. His role was not to be the hero of this story. He could not carry the ring. He could not be the one to end this war with a single swift action. That path was denied to him, for it would lead to his own damnation, and the world's. He let out a long, slow breath, a sign of acceptance. "I understand," he said, his voice now heavy with a new, weary wisdom. He looked at Frodo. "The burden must be yours, Frodo Baggins. I cannot take it from you." Then he turned to the rest of the council, his blue eyes once again clear and resolved. "But I will not stand aside. I cannot carry the ring, but I can carry the man who does. I can be a shield for him. I can be a sword for the Fellowship. I will walk this path with you. I will stand between you and any physical harm. I will give my life to see the ring-bearer safely to the fire." He was no longer offering a simple solution. He was taking an oath. He was pledging his immense godlike power, not to rule but to serve. He was choosing to be the guardian, the shield of the Fellowship, and in that moment of humble, willing sacrifice, the last best son of Krypton truly became a hero of Middle-earth. In the Black Tower of Barad-dûr, the great eye of Sauron contracted in a spasm of pure, incandescent fury. The lidless, fiery pupil focused not on the lands of Gondor or Rohan, but on the distant hidden valley of Rivendell, where its sight was dimmed by the power of the elven ring Villia. But Sauron did not need to see. He had felt it. He had felt the sudden, violent banishment of 5 of his Nazgûl at Weathertop. He had felt their spirits shriek back to Mordor, not merely defeated but terrified, their immortal essences seared by a light so pure it was a spiritual poison. They gibbered of a man in blue who could not be cut, who could not be broken, and whose eyes burned with the fury of the sun. Sauron, a being of ancient cosmic intelligence, was faced with a problem that his millennia of strategic planning had never accounted for. All his plans for the conquest of Middle-earth were based on a simple, proven principle: overwhelming military might, coupled with the corrupting, will-breaking power of the ring and the terror of his chief servants. Now a new piece was on the board, a piece that rendered his primary strategies obsolete. What good was an army of 10,000 orcs against a being who could move faster than an arrow and could shatter a mountain with a single blow? What good was the terror of the Nazgûl against a being who felt no fear and could unmake them with a look? The eye turned, its gaze sweeping across the blasted plains of Gorgoroth, where his armies were mustering. He saw his legions of orcs, his towering siege engines, his brutish mountain trolls. They were a force that could crush the world of men like an insect. But against this Starfallen, as his spies were now calling him, they were nothing. They were a tide of flesh that would break against an unbreachable wall. Sauron was not a fool. He was not a mindless beast like the Balrogs of old. He knew he could not defeat this being in a physical confrontation. It was an unwinnable fight. To even attempt it would be a catastrophic waste of his resources. And so, in a moment of cold, pragmatic clarity, the Dark Lord of Mordor abandoned his entire military strategy. The war would no longer be won on the fields of Pelennor or at the gates of Minas Tirith. It would be won in the heart and mind of a single godlike man. His new strategy was simple, and infinitely more dangerous. He had to corrupt the Star-Fallen. He could not overwhelm him with force, so he would undermine him with temptation. He could not break his body, so he would poison his soul. Sauron's immense consciousness, a web of malice and manipulation that stretched across the continent, began to weave a new, intricate plan. First, he would use his most powerful tool, the One Ring. He could feel the connection between the ring and its bearer, the Hobbit. Through that connection, he could now also feel the presence of the Star-Fallen, a beacon of light and power that was a constant, painful irritant. The ring would be the lure. He knew with a deceiver's instinct that a being of such goodness would be tempted not by power for himself, but by the power to save others. The ring would become a promise of ultimate salvation, a tool to end all suffering. It was a promise that would be irresistible to a being who saw all of life as precious. Second, he would use the world itself as a weapon. He would not send his armies to fight Kal-El directly. He would send them to slaughter villages, to burn fields, to create as much pain and suffering as possible, all within the Star-Fallen's sight. He would force him to watch, to choose who to save, to understand that he could not be everywhere at once. He would use the world's pain to cultivate a sense of failure and helplessness in this being of ultimate power, to make him desperate for a solution, a final solution. Third, he would use his servants not as warriors, but as tempters. The Nazgul would no longer attack with swords, but with whispers. They would haunt the edges of his perception, showing him visions of a peaceful, orderly world under his benevolent rule. Saruman, his new useful pawn, would be tasked with engaging the Star-Fallen in a battle of philosophies, of using his honeyed, reasonable voice to argue for the greater good that could be achieved through absolute power. The ultimate goal was no longer to reclaim the ring for himself. The new goal was to make the Star-Fallen take the ring. If Kal-El took the ring, one of two things would happen. Either he would be utterly corrupted, his goodness twisted into a new, terrifying form of tyranny. He would become a dark lord of light, a benevolent dictator whose rule would be absolute and eternal. In this, Sauron would still lose, but the world of men and their precious freedom would be utterly crushed, which was a victory in itself. Or, and this was the outcome Sauron truly hoped for, the Star-Fallen would take the ring, and his pure, good heart, in its battle against the ring's immense malice, would be torn apart. The resulting schism, a war within the soul of a god, would either drive him mad or destroy him utterly. The great eye of Mordor settled, its fiery pupil contracting with a new, patient, and infinitely more sinister focus. The game was no longer chess. It was a delicate, cruel surgery on the soul of a hero. Sauron, the master of deceit, was about to begin his greatest and most terrible work. The Fellowship's journey south from Rivendell was a strange, almost surreal experience. They traveled under a constant, unspoken shield. Sauron's spies, the Crebain from Dunland, would appear as a black cloud on the horizon, only to suddenly veer away in a panic, as if they had flown into an invisible wall of pure psychic dread. Warg patrols that sniffed their trail would suddenly turn and flee, their animal senses overwhelmed by a presence they could not comprehend. Kal-El, who they now called Elendil, the Star Friend, was their guardian. He walked with them, his quiet, gentle presence a stark contrast to his impossible power. At night, while the others slept, he would stand watch, a silent, sleepless sentinel. Often he would simply float a few feet off the ground, a cross-legged figure of calm meditation, his senses extended for miles, listening for any approaching threat. Their path was blocked by the cruel mountain of Caradhras. As the blizzard, driven by the mountain's ill will, descended upon them, threatening to freeze them to death in the high pass, Kal-El acted. He flew into the heart of the storm, a small, dark speck against the swirling white. He found the source of the mountain's rage, a nexus of cold, elemental fury. He did not fight it. He simply hovered before it and unleashed a controlled, gentle pulse of his heat vision, not as an attack, but as a wave of pure, calming warmth. The storm's anger faltered, the wind died, and the snow ceased. The pass cleared. He had soothed the mountain's spirit as one would calm a frightened animal. They were forced by the presence of the Watcher in the water to take the dark path through the mines of Moria. The long dark of Khazad-dûm was oppressive, a heavy, silent tomb, but even here, Clark's presence was a comfort. His supervision allowed him to see in the absolute darkness as if it were day, guiding their steps. His super hearing picked up the skittering of goblin feet miles away, allowing them to avoid patrols long before they were ever in danger. But there was one thing in the deeps that could not be avoided, a power that was not hiding, but slumbering. In the chamber of Mazarbul, as they stood before the tomb of Balin, the drums began. Doom, doom, doom. A vast army of goblins and cave trolls swarmed them. While the Fellowship fought a desperate battle to bar the door, Kal-El simply walked to the other entrance, braced himself against the stone, and with a grunt of effort, pushed. 1,000,000 tons of rock shifted, and the entire passageway collapsed, sealing the chamber and cutting off the goblin attack. But they had awoken something far worse. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, as they made their desperate flight towards the eastern gate, the great shadow emerged, a being of living darkness and fire, a Balrog of Morgoth, its flaming sword and whip held high. It was a demon of the ancient world, a being of pure elemental malice. Gandalf knew this was a foe beyond any of them. "This is a foe beyond any of you," he cried. "Fly, I must hold the bridge." He prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, to give his life to save the Fellowship. But as he strode to the center of the bridge, a gentle but firm hand rested on his shoulder. It was Clark. "No, Gandalf," the Starfallen said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Your life is too valuable to be thrown away. Let me." Before the wizard could protest, Kal-El walked past him to the center of the slender stone bridge. He stood before the advancing demon, a simple man in blue against a creature of mythic terror. The Balrog roared, a sound of fire and cracking stone. It recognized power, and the being before it radiated a power unlike any it had ever known. It was a power of light, of the sun, and it was anathema. The Balrog struck, its sword of fire descending with the force to shatter the bridge. Kal-El did not dodge. He simply raised his arm and caught the blade. The magical fire, a thing that could melt stone and steel, washed over his arm. And for the first time since arriving in this world, Kal-El felt pain. It was not an agonizing pain, but a searing, tingling heat, like holding his hand over a forge. This creature's power was not purely physical. It was magical, and magic was one of the few things that could harm him. He grunted, not in pain, but in surprise. He held the blade fast, his hand clamped around the molten steel. The Balrog, its own immense strength met by an even greater one, roared in frustration. It lashed out with its whip of flame. The fiery thongs wrapped around Kal-El's body, the magical fire scorching his suit and searing his skin. This was a true fight. "So," Kal-El said, a grim smile on his face as he looked the demon in its fiery eyes, "you can be hurt." With a roar of his own, he pushed back. He did not just stop the Balrog's attack, he drove the demon backward. He wrenched the flaming sword from its grasp and hurled it into the chasm below. He tore the whip from his body, his skin smoking and already beginning to heal. The Balrog, now disarmed but no less furious, lunged forward, seeking to grapple, to tear him apart with its claws and fangs. Kal-El met the charge. The two beings of mythic power collided on the center of the bridge. It was a brutal physical struggle. They were not two warriors, they were two forces of nature. The light of the sun against the fire of the earth's core. Kal-El locked his hands around the Balrog's throat. The demon clawed at him, its shadowy form burning with intense heat. With a final titanic effort, Kal-El lifted the massive demon from its feet. He spun, using the creature's own momentum against it, and hurled it from the bridge. The Balrog fell, a shrieking comet of fire and shadow. But it was not defeated. Its fiery whip lashed out one last time, catching Kal-El around the ankle, trying to drag him down into the abyss with it. Kal-El was pulled to the edge of the broken bridge. For a moment it seemed he too would fall, but then, with a calm, deliberate motion, he pushed off from the stone and launched himself into the chasm after the demon. The Fellowship cried out in horror, but he was not falling. He was flying. He flew down into the darkness, caught the Balrog in a wrestler's grip, and with a final, world-breaking surge of strength, he flew up. He did not just fly out of the chasm. He flew straight up, through the thousands of feet of solid rock that formed the mountain's peak. He burst from the snow-capped summit of Ziraxigil in a cataclysm of shattered stone and exploding snow, carrying the shrieking, struggling demon with him into the sky. There, under the cold light of the distant stars, he finished the fight, a silent, brutal battle in the thin, frozen air. A few moments later, he descended, scorched and smoking, but victorious. He landed softly back on the bridge before the stunned Fellowship. He had not just defeated the Balrog, he had wrestled it, thrown it from a cliff, pursued it into the abyss, and then dragged it out to be broken on its own mountain peak. And Gandalf the Grey, his purpose on the bridge unfulfilled, was still alive to see it. The path of history had been irrevocably altered. After the momentous events in Moria, the Fellowship, still intact, found its way to the golden wood of Lothlorien. The Lady Galadriel looked upon Kal-El with a new, profound awe, her foresight utterly broken by this being who could so casually rewrite the fate of the world. She saw in him a hope greater than any she had dared to imagine, and a peril equally as vast. Their journey continued, and through the twists and turns of fate, they found themselves reunited with a reborn Gandalf the White, and on the road to the besieged kingdom of Rohan. They arrived at the fortress of Helm's Deep, as the last of the refugees were filing in, the grim horns of Saruman's army already echoing in the valley. 10,000 Uruk-hai, a black tide of hate and iron, surrounded the fortress. The defenders were a mere 300. The despair was a thick, tangible thing. But they had a new defender, a man who could fly. "Their numbers are too great," Theoden said, his voice heavy with the weight of his doomed kingdom. "We cannot hope to hold the wall." "You will not have to hold it alone, my lord," Aragorn replied, his gaze fixed on the quiet, blue-clad figure who stood beside him on the battlements. Kal-El looked out at the sea of snarling armored creatures. He had faced down armies before. He saw their crude siege ladders, their heavy stone-throwing catapults. To him it was a problem of simple physics. The siege began with a storm of arrows. Clark simply stood on the deeping wall, a calm, unbreachable shield. The iron-tipped arrows, which rained down in a black torrent, bent, flattened, and broke against his invulnerable skin, falling around his feet like harmless rain. The sight alone was enough to send a surge of impossible hope through the beleaguered defenders. Then came the catapults. Massive stones, the size of small houses, were hurled through the air, their trajectory aimed at shattering the ancient stone of the deeping wall. Kal-El flew. He became a blue and red streak in the night sky. He met the first great stone 100 yards from the wall. He did not shatter it, he simply stopped it, catching the multi-ton projectile in his bare hands, its momentum absorbed without a hint of effort. He hovered for a moment, holding the massive boulder, and then, with a casual flick of his wrists, he tossed it back. It flew through the air and crashed into the catapult that had launched it, smashing the war machine into 1,000 splinters. He repeated the process again and again. He became a one-man anti-artillery system, catching the stones of the enemy and returning them with pinpoint accuracy, dismantling Saruman's siege engines one by one. The Uruk-hai, creatures of brute force and direct strategy, were utterly bewildered. Their greatest weapons were being turned against them by a flying man who could catch boulders. Enraged, they brought forth their ladders and charged the walls. The fighting became a desperate, hand-to-hand struggle. Elves and men fought with a renewed vigor, inspired by the impossible feats of their new ally. But the sheer numbers of the Uruk-hai were overwhelming. They began to pour over the walls. It was then that Saruman's final gambit was revealed. A berserker, carrying a great bomb, sprinted for the culvert. The bomb was lit. The explosion tore a great gaping hole in the deeping wall. A triumphant roar went up from the Uruk-hai as they surged towards the breach, victory now within their grasp. But as the smoke and dust cleared, they found the breach was not undefended. Kal-El stood in the center of the jagged opening, his red cape a defiant banner against the darkness. His face, for the first time, was not one of calm compassion. It was a mask of grim, righteous anger. The explosion had momentarily stunned him, the concussive force and magical accelerant causing his ears to ring, but it had not harmed him. It had only made him angry. He did not have a weapon. He did not need one. The first Uruk-hai charged into the breach, its shield raised. Clark did not even punch it. He simply stood his ground. The Uruk slammed into him, and it was like running into a mountain. The creature's shield shattered. Its bones broke, and it fell back, a broken wreck. The tide of Uruk-hai poured into the breach, and they broke upon him. He was an immovable object, a silent, unbreachable wall of blue and red. He did not kill them with the savagery of a warrior. He dispatched them with a cold, efficient, and almost regrettable precision. He would catch a sword in his bare hand and bend it into a useless knot. He would lift a charging Uruk and simply throw him back into the crowd with enough force to knock down a dozen more. His heat vision, a thin, precise, surgical beam, lanced out, not to kill, but to disarm. He melted the swords in their hands, the helmets on their heads, causing chaos and terror without resorting to lethal force. He held the breach, alone, for what seemed like an eternity. He was a single, solitary guardian, and the entire army of Isengard could not move him. The battle for the breach was a turning point. The Uruk-hai, who had been on the verge of victory, found their unstoppable tide breaking against an immovable object. The sight of a single, unarmed man holding back hundreds of their finest warriors was a blow to their morale more devastating than any volley of arrows. Aragorn and Gimli, who had rushed to defend the breach, arrived to find a scene of controlled chaos. The Starfallen stood in the center of the opening, a calm anchor in a storm of snarling Uruks. He was not fighting like a man, he was managing a crisis. He would disarm one, trip another, and simply push back a charging group with a single open palm. He was a living barricade. "Come on, you hairy-legged beasts," Gimli roared, his initial shock giving way to a warrior's glee. "He can't have all the fun." He and Aragorn plunged into the fray, their own weapons a welcome addition of lethal force to Kal-El's non-lethal defense. Even with their combined might, the pressure was immense. The Uruk-hai were relentless. The night wore on, every moment a desperate struggle for survival. As the first hint of dawn touched the sky, King Theoden made his final, desperate choice. He would ride out. He would meet his end not cowering in a cave but in the saddle, sword in hand. The great horn of Helm Hammerhand blew, its deep note a defiant cry against the coming dawn. The gates of the Hornburg opened, and the king and his riders charged forth, a final glorious ride into ruin. But their ruin was not to be. As the horses thundered down the causeway towards the wall of Uruk pikes, a blue and red streak shot past them. Kal-El, deciding that the defensive phase of the battle was over, took to the air. He flew at the head of the charge, a living vanguard. He did not fly high. He flew a few feet off the ground, a human battering ram moving at 100 miles an hour. He smashed into the pike wall. The disciplined formation of the Uruk-hai, braced to receive a cavalry charge, simply disintegrated. Pikes snapped like twigs. Iron shields buckled and tore. Uruks were thrown into the air like dolls, their bodies broken by the sheer concussive force of his passage. He carved a wide, clear path through the heart of the enemy's formation. Theoden and his riders galloped through the gap, their swords and spears finding their marks in the shocked and shattered ranks of the enemy. The charge, meant to be a final, glorious death, had become a stunningly effective counterattack. It was at that moment that Gandalf and Éomer arrived, their 2,000 spears cresting the hill like the morning sun. The Uruk-hai, now trapped between the king's charge from the front and the White Riders from the rear, finally broke and fled in terror. They fled from the spears of the Rohirrim, they fled from the light of Gandalf's staff, but most of all, they fled from the flying man with the eyes of fire. As the battle turned into a rout, the men of Rohan looked upon their savior with a sense of profound religious awe. This was no mere warrior, this was no wizard. He flew like the great eagles. He burned with the light of the sun. He had the strength of the mountains themselves. The whispers that had started on the road to Helm's Deep now became a certainty, a legend forged in the fires of a single impossible night. He was not just the Green Knight they had first thought him. He was more. He was Elendil, the Star Friend, a name from the oldest of legends given new, vibrant life. He was an angel, a messenger from the Valor, sent to them in their darkest hour. For the first time in a generation, for the first time in the slow fading twilight of their age, the people of Rohan felt a new, unfamiliar sensation. It was not the grim courage of a hopeless fight. It was not the weary resolve to die well. It was hope, pure, simple, and absolute. They believed they could win, and that belief, a gift from the man from the stars, was a weapon more powerful than any sword or spear. The victory at Helm's Deep was a staggering blow to Saruman. From the pinnacle of Orthanc, he had watched his perfect invincible army be shattered, his flawless siege plan dismantled, his entire strategy for the conquest of Rohan undone, and it was all the work of one being. His initial fury and obsession with capturing the Iron Golem had now curdled into something far more dangerous, a cold, intellectual, and utterly obsessive need to understand and corrupt. He could not defeat the Starfallen with force. That much was now painfully, humiliatingly clear. But Saruman's greatest weapon had never been his armies. It was his voice, his cunning, his ability to reason, to persuade, to find the cracks in any soul and whisper poison into them. He retreated to his chambers, to the Palantir. He knew that a being of such power would be able to sense him if he simply tried to scry. He had to make contact directly. He poured his will into the Seeing Stone, not searching for the Starfallen but calling to him, On the battlements of the now secured Hornburg, Kal-El was helping with the grim task of clearing the dead. He moved massive stones with ease, cleared blocked passages, and used his heat vision to cauterize the wounds of the injured, a gentle warming touch that saved dozens of lives. He felt the call as a subtle, insistent whisper in the back of his mind. It was not the raw malice of Sauron. It was a smooth, reasonable and deeply intelligent voice, a voice that did not demand but invited. Man of stars, being of impossible power, do you not grow weary of this world's petty, endless squabbles? Do you not see the futility of their wars? Clark paused, a massive stone held effortlessly in his hands. He looked towards the distant, dark spire of Orthanc, which he could see clearly with his telescopic vision. He did not need to speak. He knew the voice could hear his thoughts as clearly as he could hear its. "Who is this?" "I am Saruman," the voice replied, smooth as silk. "Like you, I am a being of a higher order, gifted with a sight that these poor blind creatures cannot comprehend. I have watched you, I have seen your power, and I have seen the waste of it." Waste? Clark thought, a flicker of indignation touching him. "I am saving lives. You are patching a leaking dam with your finger," Saruman's voice whispered, a tone of sad paternal wisdom. "You save this fortress, and 1,000 will die in Gondor. You save a city, and a kingdom will fall to plague. You cannot be everywhere. You cannot fix the fundamental flaw of this world. Its chaos, its meaningless, repetitive cycle of violence and suffering." Saruman began to use the Palantir not just as a communication device, but as a projector. He sent visions directly into Kal-El's mind. He did not show him battles or monsters. He showed him the quiet, grinding misery of the world. He showed him a child in the far east of Harad, dying of starvation. He showed him a village in the north, racked by a wasting plague. He showed him a good man being executed by a petty, corrupt lord in a forgotten fiefdom of Gondor. He showed him an endless tapestry of suffering, all of it beyond the reach of his fists or his heat vision. "You see," Saruman whispered, his voice filled with a feigned empathy. "You have the power of a god, but you use it as a common soldier. You fight their battles, but you do not solve their problems. You are a bandage, not a cure." "What is your point, Saruman?" Clark thought, his own heart aching at the visions of suffering. This was his greatest pain, the knowledge that he could not save everyone. "My point, Starfriend, is that there is a cure," Saruman said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, tempting hush. "A tool, the very thing these fools seek to destroy. The One Ring. They fear it because they are weak, but you are not weak. Imagine its power in your hands, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to heal." New visions flooded Clark's mind, visions of what could be. He saw himself, holding the ring, its power flowing through him. He saw himself ending the war not with a battle, but with a word. He saw himself commanding the rains to fall on the fields of Harad, ending the famine. He saw himself purging the plague from the northern villages with a gesture. He saw himself creating a world of perfect peace, of perfect health, of perfect justice, a world where no one ever suffered again. "It is the only way," Saruman whispered, his voice the sound of pure, cold, seductive logic. "The only way to truly save them all. Do not let these fearful, short-sighted mortals convince you to throw away the world's only hope. Take the ring, fulfill your true purpose, become the savior you were always meant to be." The visions faded. The voice fell silent. Kal-El stood on the wall, his heart pounding. Saruman's words had struck him with the force of a physical blow. The wizard had not appealed to his ambition, his pride, or his anger. He had appealed to his compassion. He had taken Superman's greatest, most defining trait and had tried to turn it into a weapon. He had never felt so violated, and he had never felt so tempted. The journey to Lothlorien was, for Kal-El, a flight into a dream. After the grim, brutal reality of Helm's Deep, the Golden Wood was a sanctuary of peace and ancient living light. He walked beneath the Malorn trees, his super senses soothed by the gentle, harmonious music of the forest, a place where every leaf and branch seemed to sing with a quiet, joyful life. But his heart was troubled. Saruman's whispers had planted a seed of doubt, a venomous, logical question that he could not shake. Was he truly doing enough? Was his refusal to take ultimate power an act of humility, or an act of cowardice that condemned millions to suffer? He was brought before the Lord Celeborn and the Lady Galadriel. When Galadriel's eyes, which held the light of the stars of the elder days, fell upon him, he felt a sense of being truly seen for the first time in this world. That evening she invited him to her garden, to the basin that held her mirror. "You are troubled, Elendil," she said, her voice not a question but a statement of fact. "A wise man spoke to me," Clark admitted. "He showed me the suffering of this world. He told me that I have the power to end it, but that I refuse to use it." "You have spoken with Saruman," Galadriel said, a shadow passing over her beautiful face. "He is a master of twisting truth, of making the cage of a tyrant look like the arms of a savior. He has shown you the promise of the ring." "He showed me a world without pain," Clark corrected her gently. "A world at peace." "There is no peace without freedom," Galadriel countered. "And the ring offers only the peace of the slave. Come, look into the mirror. It shows things that were, things that are, and some things that have not yet come to pass." Hesitantly, Clark looked into the silver basin. The water swirled, and an image formed. He saw himself, but different. His eyes glowed with a cold, golden light, not the warm red of his heat vision. He was floating above a great white city, clearly Minas Tirith, but it was changed. It was clean, perfect, and utterly silent. Banners bearing his own sigil hung from every tower. Men and elves and dwarves walked the streets below, their faces devoid of emotion. They were healthy, they were fed, they were safe, but there was no laughter, no art, no song. They moved with the perfect ordered precision of automatons. He saw himself reach out a hand, and a mountain on the horizon was reshaped, its peak flattened to make way for a new, perfectly logical structure. He saw himself stop a storm before it could form, silencing the wind itself. He had taken control not just of the people, but of the very world. "This is the world you would create," Galadriel's voice whispered, filled with a profound sorrow. "You would save them from all suffering, yes, but you would also save them from themselves. You would take away their right to choose, their right to fail, their right to be mortal. Your love for them would become their prison. Every life would be a life in your perfect, beautiful, suffocating zoo." The image in the mirror shifted. It now showed Galadriel herself. The ring was on her finger. She grew tall, terrible, and beautiful, a queen stronger than the foundations of the earth. "I too have been tempted," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us are. To take the ring is to give in to the desire to command, to order, to fix the world according to our own wisdom. But that is not our place. The story of this world is not ours to write." The vision faded, leaving only the reflection of his own troubled face. He understood. Saruman had shown him the promise. Galadriel had shown him the price. The price was everything. He then looked at Galadriel, and for the first time decided to truly look back. He focused his own senses, his X-ray vision, his microscopic sight, not on her body, but on the very light that emanated from her. He saw the ring on her finger, Nenya, and he saw how its power was woven into the very fabric of the forest, and he saw something else, a deep, profound weariness, a slow, inevitable fading. "You are leaving," he said, the words a soft, sad realization. "You and your people, this forest, it is all passing away." Galadriel looked at him, her elven eyes wide with surprise. No mortal had ever perceived her fate so clearly. She nodded slowly. "Our time is ending. The time of men is at hand. We are but stewards, holding back the long defeat for a little while." In that moment, Clark's perspective shifted. He saw Galadriel not as a queen or a sorceress, but as a parent, lovingly and sadly watching her children prepare to make their own way in the world, knowing they would stumble and fall, but knowing she could not and should not protect them forever. He finally understood the wisdom of his own father, Jonathan Kent. "You are not just a man, but you can choose to be one. You are not their savior. You are just here to help." "Thank you, Lady Galadriel," he said, his voice now clear. The seed of Saruman's poison withered and dead. "You have shown me the truth." He had been reminded of the most important and most difficult lesson he had ever learned. He could not control the world. He could only inspire it. He could be a shield, a light, a symbol, but the choices, the failures, and the triumphs had to belong to the people themselves. That was the only salvation that truly mattered. The journey south was a race against time. After the victory at Helm's Deep and the confrontation with Saruman at Isengard, the signs were clear. Sauron's full might was about to be unleashed upon the white city of Minas Tirith. Gandalf rode ahead on Shadowfax to rally the city's defenses, while Aragorn, with Theoden and the army of Rohan, prepared for the long ride to their allies' aid. Kal-El, however, was not bound by the speed of horses. "Go with them," he said to Aragorn. "Be the king they need you to be. I will go ahead. I will be their shield until you arrive." And with that, he took to the sky. He flew south, a blue and red streak that crossed the plains of Rohan and the blasted lands of Anorion in a matter of hours. He arrived at Minas Tirith to find a city on the brink of despair. The sky was unnaturally dark, a great swirling cloud of shadow emanating from Mordor that blotted out the sun. And on the plains of the Pelennor before the city, a vast dark ocean of orcs, Easterlings, and Haradrim was assembling, their numbers beyond counting. The city was gripped by fear, its soldiers pale and grim, its steward Denethor lost in madness. Then, they saw him, a speck in the dark sky, growing larger, a man flying without wings, his red cape a defiant banner against the oppressive gloom. He landed softly on the highest parapet of the White Tower, his presence a sudden brilliant splash of color in a world of gray and black. A gasp went through the city. The legends of the Star Friend, the Angel of Helm's Deep, had reached them, and now he was here. A single silent figure of impossible hope standing against a tide of absolute evil. The siege began. The great catapults of Mordor, 100 strong, began to hurl their terrible ammunition. It was not just stone, but the severed heads of the men of Osgiliath, a form of psychological warfare designed to shatter the defenders' morale. Kal-El met the volley in the air. He became a blur of motion, flying back and forth between the city and the enemy lines. He caught the severed heads with a gentle, sorrowful reverence, carrying them back to the city to be treated with dignity. He caught the great stones and simply crushed them into dust in his hands. He was a one-man anti-siege screen, and not a single projectile reached the walls of Minas Tirith. The orcs, enraged by the failure of their bombardment, brought forth their great weapon. Grond, the battering ram forged in the likeness of the great wolf's head of old, was dragged forward by colossal beasts, its iron-shod head ready to shatter the unbreakable gate. A wave of terror washed over the city as the great ram was brought into position. Kal-El flew down to meet it. He landed on the causeway before the gate, a solitary, defiant figure. The orcs howled, and the great beast strained, pushing the 100-foot-long ram forward for its first, devastating strike. Clark simply held up his hands. The head of Grond, a thing of iron and hate that weighed many tons, slammed into his open palms. There was a deep, groaning, metallic boom that echoed across the plains. The ground shuddered. The great beasts bellowed as they were thrown back by the force of the impact. The orcs around the ram were knocked from their feet. Grond did not move. It was held fast. Its immense momentum stopped dead by the man in blue. The unbreakable gate was untouched. Clark grunted with effort, the first time anyone in this world had seen him truly strain. He pushed back. The iron head of the ram began to buckle and deform under the pressure of his hands. With a final explosive shove, he bent the iron into a useless twisted knot and pushed the entire massive war machine back, where it collapsed in a heap, its purpose unfulfilled. A stunned, disbelieving silence fell over the orc army. Their greatest siege engine was broken. Their bombardment was useless. It was then that the true darkness arrived. The Witch King of Angmar, mounted on his terrifying fell beast, swooped down from the sky, his piercing shriek a wave of pure despair. He landed on the parapet where Gandalf stood, his presence shattering the courage of the nearby soldiers. "You fool," the Witch King hissed at the wizard. "No living man can kill me. This city is mine." He raised his great black mace, but before he could strike, a red and blue blur slammed into him. Kal-El, having dealt with Grond, had flown up to meet the new threat. He tackled the Witch King, sending them both tumbling from the wall onto the plains below. The fell beast shrieked and tried to intervene, but a focused blast of heat vision sent it crashing to the ground in flames. The Witch King rose, his form a vortex of shadow and malice. He faced the Starfallen, the being who had shattered his blade at Weathertop. "You cannot kill me, Star Child," the wraith whispered, its voice the sound of a forgotten tomb. "My fate is beyond the touch of mortal men." "I am not a man," Clark replied, his eyes beginning to glow with a righteous, holy fire, "and I have no intention of killing you. I am going to send you into the light." He unleashed his heat vision, not as a beam, but as a full, radiant, sun-like blast, just as he had at Weathertop. It was a torrent of pure, positive energy, the very essence of a yellow sun, focused on the creature of pure, negative shadow. The Witch King of Angmar, the Lord of the Nazgul, the greatest servant of Sauron, did not even have time to scream. His ancient armor, his black robes, his very physical form were not just burned but utterly, completely, and irrevocably annihilated. His spirit, which had been bound to the world by Sauron's evil will, was unmade, dissolved in a wave of light so pure it could not endure. The greatest of the nine was gone. Kal-El stood alone on the Pelennor fields, the last wisps of the Witch King's shadow dissolving around him. He had saved the city. He had saved Gandalf. He had broken the siege, and the army of Mordor, their greatest champion now utterly erased from existence, began to falter, their courage replaced by a new and terrible fear. The victory on the Pelennor fields was a miracle, a triumph of impossible hope against overwhelming darkness. The arrival of Aragorn and the army of the dead had sealed the fate of the orcs on the field, and the subsequent arrival of the Rohirrim had turned the tide into a rout. Minas Tirith was saved. But the war was not over. In the Council of the Lords of the West, a desperate final gambit was decided. Frodo and Sam were still somewhere in the dark land of Mordor, on their impossible quest. To give them a chance, to draw the full, unwavering attention of the Eye of Sauron, Aragorn would march on the Black Gate. It was a suicidal gesture, an army of a few thousand against the remaining might of Mordor, designed to empty the land for the Ring-Bearer. As the army of the West, a small, grim but determined host, prepared to march, Aragorn spoke with Kal-El. "This is a fool's errand," Aragorn said, his face etched with the weariness of a king going to his own coronation and funeral at the same time. "We march to our deaths. You do not have to come. You have done more than enough for this world." "Where you go, I go, Aragorn," Clark replied simply, placing a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "You are not just marching as a decoy. You are marching as a symbol of defiance, a symbol that hope has not died. I will be your champion." And so he flew with them. He did not fly ahead. He floated slowly above the marching army of men, his red cape a brilliant banner of scarlet against the gray, blighted lands leading to Mordor. His presence was a silent, constant source of strength for the soldiers. They marched into the heart of their enemy's domain, not with fear, but with a strange, defiant joy, for they marched with an angel at their side. They arrived before the Black Gate of Mordor, the Morannon, a grim, iron-toothed mouth in a wall of shadow and mountains. The army of the West arrayed itself on the slag-covered hills before it, a tiny island of light in a sea of despair. Aragorn, Gandalf, and the other lords rode forward, with Kal-El floating silently beside them. They called for the Lord of the land to come forth. The great gates did not open. Instead, a smaller door creaked open, and a single terrifying figure rode out on a great black horse. It was the mouth of Sauron, his face hidden, his voice a sibilant whisper of ancient evil. He mocked them, showing them Frodo's mithril shirt, trying to break their spirit with despair. It did not work. Their spirit was no longer so easily broken. The mouth of Sauron then turned his attention to Kal-El, his hidden eyes fixing on the floating man of stars. "My master has seen you, Star Child," the emissary hissed. "He knows your power, and he too makes you an offer." The emissary's voice became smooth, seductive. "This world is broken. It is fading. Why would a being like you chain yourself to its dying corpse? My master can remake it. He can make it strong again. He offers you a place at his side, not as a servant, but as a brother, a god of a new, stronger world. You will rule the sky. He will rule the earth. All suffering will end under our joint, benevolent and absolute dominion. Kneel, and you shall be a king forever." It was the same temptation Saruman had offered, but cruder, more direct, stripped of all pretense of goodness. It was an offer of pure, naked power. Kal-El slowly floated down to the ground, landing softly before the emissary. He looked at the mouth of Sauron, his blue eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound, almost pitying sadness. "This world doesn't need another king," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying with an absolute finality that echoed across the desolate plains. "And it certainly doesn't need another god." With that simple, humble, and utterly defiant refusal, he sealed his own fate, and the fate of the world. He turned his back on the emissary, and walked back to stand with Aragorn. "So be it," Gandalf said, his own voice ringing with a new, hard strength. "We have come to challenge the power of Sauron, and we will not be turned aside by the words of his slaves." The mouth of Sauron, his offer rejected, his purpose failed, let out a screech of pure fury. The age of men is over. The time of the orc has come. He turned and fled back into the gate. And as the great black gate of Mordor began to swing open, revealing a vast, endless sea of orcs that stretched as far as the eye could see, the final, desperate battle for the fate of Middle-earth was about to begin. The Battle of the Moron was not a battle. It was a desperate, hopeless last stand. The army of the West, numbering a mere 6,000, was completely surrounded by a force 60,000 strong. It was a small island of courage, about to be drowned by a tidal wave of hate. But they had a champion. As the orcs charged, Kal-El became a whirlwind of red and blue. He was not a single soldier. He was an entire air force. He flew back and forth across the enemy lines, a living comet. He did not use his heat vision to kill. That would be too easy, too much like the slaughter he abhorred. Instead, he used his speed and strength to create chaos and disruption on a massive scale. He flew at supersonic speeds just above the orcs' heads, the sonic booms from his passage sending entire regiments tumbling in confusion, their eardrums bursting. He landed among their siege towers and simply pushed them over, crushing hundreds of orcs at a time. He flew to the great lumbering mountain trolls, and with a gentle but irresistible force, simply lifted them into the air and deposited them miles away in the mountains of Gorgoroth. He was a one-man force of crowd control, sowing so much chaos and confusion in the orc ranks that the army of the West, though outnumbered 10 to 1, was able to hold its ground against the disorganized, terrified waves of the enemy. But this battle was a feint. The true struggle was happening miles away, on the fiery slopes of Mount Doom, and Sauron knew it. Kal-El, his senses extended, could hear it all. He could hear the desperate, ragged breathing of Frodo Baggins as he struggled up the mountain. He could hear the loyal, encouraging words of Samwise Gamgee. He could hear the faint, treacherous whisper of the ring, its malice growing ever stronger as it neared the fires of its creation. His entire being was focused on that small, struggling heartbeat. He was the army's shield, but his true purpose was to be the guardian of that one small life. It was then that Sauron unleashed his final, most desperate, and most terrible weapon. It was not an army. It was not a Nazgul. It was a whisper. A psychic assault aimed not at the army of the West, but at the mind of the Starfallen alone. Sauron, his will focused through the One Ring, which was now at the peak of its power, reached across the miles and into Kal-El's soul. He did not show him visions of power or conquest. He knew those would fail. He showed him home. Suddenly, Kal-El was no longer on the black plains of Mordor. He was in the red, crystalline streets of Kandor, the great city of Krypton. The air was filled with the familiar, humming energies of his home world. The sky was lit by the benevolent, dying glow of a great red sun. And the people were there, his people, Kryptonians, in their elegant, flowing robes, their faces filled with a serene, intellectual light. And at their head stood two figures, a man with a proud, noble bearing, and the S-sigil of the House of El on his chest, and a woman with kind, loving eyes. Jor-El and Lara, his parents. "You see, son of El?" Sauron's voice whispered, but it was not his own. It was a smooth, reasonable, and loving voice, the voice of Jor-El himself. "It does not have to be an ending. It can be a beginning." The vision shifted. He saw the ring, not as a thing of evil, but as a tool of ultimate creation. He saw himself, holding it, its power flowing through him, and with that power, he reached back through time and space. He saw himself arriving at Krypton moments before its destruction, his own godlike power, amplified by the ring, strong enough to stabilize the planet's core, to hold his world together. He saw the destruction undone. He saw his people saved. He saw himself, no longer the last son of Krypton, but its savior. He saw himself standing with his father and mother, the family he had never known, the world he had only ever dreamed of, restored and made whole. "All you have to do is take it," the whisper continued, now in his mother's voice, a sound of pure, unconditional love. "Take the ring. It is not a thing of evil. It is the power of creation, the power to undo all sorrow, the power to fix what is broken, the power to bring back what was lost. Is that not the greatest good? To save a world, to save your world. Take it, my son. Come home." The temptation was absolute. It was a promise to heal the one wound in his soul that had never closed. The survivor's guilt, the profound cosmic loneliness of being the last of his kind. It could all be wiped away. He stood on the battlefield, frozen, his eyes glowing with a faint, unfocused light. Aragorn saw him and cried out, "Elendil, what is it?" But he could not hear him. He was lost in the dream of home, and for a single terrible moment he considered it. He turned his gaze towards Mount Doom, and he thought, I can take it. I can fix everything. The vision was perfect. It was a paradise woven from the deepest, most painful threads of his heart. To see Krypton again, to know his parents, to not be alone, it was a temptation beyond any power or throne. It was the promise of an end to his own personal lifelong sorrow. He saw Jor-El's proud smile. He felt Lara's loving embrace. And then, through the perfect, beautiful illusion, another memory surfaced. A simpler, quieter memory. A memory of an old, weathered barn in Kansas. A memory of a kind, gentle man with calloused hands placing a hand on his shoulder. You are my son, Jonathan Kent. The memory was a single, pure note of simple human love in the complex, seductive symphony of Sauron's temptation. And that one note was enough to shatter the entire illusion. He was the son of Jor-El. Yes, but he was also the son of Jonathan Kent. Krypton was his heritage, but Earth, the messy, beautiful, flawed and free world of humanity, was his home. To save Krypton by sacrificing the freedom of this new world, by becoming the very thing he fought against, would be to betray the memory of the man who had truly raised him. It would be a betrayal of everything he stood for. He looked at the vision of his Kryptonian parents, and with a heart that was breaking all over again, he let them go. No, he whispered, the single word a quiet, final judgment. The vision of Krypton shattered. The whispers of his parents faded. He was back on the black plains of Mordor, the screams of the battle raging around him. He had been tested with the ultimate temptation, and he had chosen not the ghosts of his past, but the living, struggling people of his present. He had won his own personal war. But the War of the Ring was at its final, critical moment. As Sauron's psychic assault failed, Kal-El's super hearing, now clear and focused, snapped back to the one sound he had been tracking above all others. He heard Frodo's voice, high on the slopes of Mount Doom, no longer struggling, but clear and powerful, twisted by the ring's ultimate power. The ring is mine. He heard the hobbit claim the ring. He heard the sudden, desperate struggle with Gollum. He heard the creature's triumphant cry as it seized its precious. He knew he could not interfere directly. To fly there now, to rip the ring from them, would be to invite its corruption, to risk everything. He had to trust in the hobbits, in the small, simple goodness that Gandalf had told him was their greatest strength. But he could help. He could provide the one thing they needed most, a distraction, a symbol. He looked up at the great eye of Sauron, the fiery, malevolent orb that was now focused entirely on the struggle for the ring at the crack of doom. He had to draw its gaze. He had to remind it that there was still a god on the battlefield. He flew straight up, a blue and red rocket ascending into the black, swirling clouds that choked the sky above Mordor. He stopped when he was at the very heart of the shadow, a single point of bright color in a world of absolute gloom. And then he let go. He unleashed his heat vision, not as a beam, not as a weapon, but as a starburst, a continuous, controlled, radiant explosion of pure, golden light. He poured the stored energy of a yellow sun, the very essence of his Kryptonian power, out into the darkness. He became a second sun, a star of pure, impossible hope ignited in the sky above Mordor. It burned away the shadows. It scattered the clouds. It bathed the entire Blackland in a warm, benevolent, golden light. The armies of orcs on the field below shrieked and cowered, their eyes, accustomed to darkness, blinded by the pure, holy radiance. The great eye of Sauron, its attention torn from Mount Doom, was forced to turn towards this new, agonizing light. The eye, a creature of shadow and hate, could not bear to look upon it. It flinched, it wavered, its power disrupted by this act of pure, selfless defiance. And in that one critical moment of distraction, on the edge of the crack of doom, the struggle for the ring reached its climax. Samwise Gamgee, his heart filled with a new, impossible courage, as he saw the light of his star friend in the sky, found the strength to rise. Gollum, in his moment of triumph, made his fatal misstep. The ring, with Gollum, fell into the fire. Kal-El felt it. He felt the wave of evil vanish. He felt the psychic scream of Sauron as his power was unmade. He saw the black tower of Barad-dûr crumble into dust. He saw the ground of Mordor split apart, the armies of the orcs consumed by the earth. His light faded, his energy spent. He floated gently down to the now quiet battlefield, landing beside a stunned but victorious Aragorn. He had not destroyed the ring. He had not defeated the Dark Lord, but he had held the line. He had been their shield, and in the final moment, he had become their star, a beacon of light that had allowed the smallest of heroes to find their way in the darkness. He had not won the war with his power. He had won it with his heart, and in the new hopeful dawn that was breaking over Middle-earth, the legend of the Star Friend, the last son of Krypton, would be remembered not as a king or a god, but as a simple, gentle man who had taught a fading world how to hope again.